Oh, entrance, very nice. Hello everybody, welcome to another Catalyst YouTube video. I'm Louis, I'm joined by Tom Herbert.
Hello, hi.
Hi Tom. And we're going to do a Q&A today on all things nutrition for climbing. So let's get to it. So Tom, first question, nice and easy. Who are you? Tell us about yourself. Why should everyone listen to you about nutrition? I said I wasn't going to ask it that way, but I thought it'd be more fun.
Sure. So I'm Tom Herbert. A lot of people know me as the Useful Coach. And for about 5 years now, I've been working with climbers across the board on different levels, really. And through experience, I've just got to understand a lot more about what is helping people and really just separating the sort of over-complicated into something real practical and really finding what is helping people. So yeah, that's really what I do, is just help people eat better and fuel their climbing and recovery.
Well, I'm sold. I'll listen to your advice. Tom, tell me why should I focus on nutrition for climbing? How might it help me if I wasn't focusing on it already?
So the big thing I say to people is, if you want to become a better climber, ultimately it's going to be the amount of time that you spend doing your climbing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
fundamentally.
Exactly.
And really the best way to think about nutrition is it is the supportive base that allows you just to keep going. You know, if you do more climbing throughout the week, if you can recover better, then you'll become a better climber.
Yeah,
and that's really what it is.
Yeah, completely agree. I always want to recommend that people climb as much as possible so that they can practice as much as they can, but yeah, obviously that's limited by their recovery.
Yeah, absolutely.
So nutrition would be something that steps in there.
Yeah, and I think that's really the main thing, is that a lot of people, I think, are limiting themselves in their development because, and we've all done it, we smash out a massive session, you know, we're super motivated, and then we kind of under-recovered, and then something comes along and we maybe injure ourselves, and it's this sort of up and down, you know, one step forward, 2 steps back the whole time.
What we want is just constant, consistent time to practice.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's not a difficult thing to get that right with nutrition, to just have a level of consistency that allows you to have a level of consistency with your climbing.
Well, let's go into a little bit more detail then. So, protein, let's start with that. Everyone knows, I think just the basic understanding of protein helps build muscle, helps make us strong, but how much, when, how is it different for climbers? What do you think?
Sure. So with nutrition, everyone always starts with protein, and it's quite simply because it is the building blocks of our tissues, and that's going to be the way that we get basically healthier tissues as we go. And the easiest way to think about it is really you want to, at the basic, is have 3 meals that have protein, and you build your meals around that protein. And for people, if without going into numbers, if you're eating animal products, then a protein is about the size of your palm. Okay. So if you can imagine, a whole chicken breast is going to give you probably about 45 grams of protein, and you really only need about 25 to 30 grams per meal. Okay. So one of the things that's very good about understanding a little bit more about nutrition and protein is it actually helps with the budget. Yeah. You know, you don't need to slam down 2 chicken breasts in a meal or have 4 protein shakes a day.
And it's just wasteful if you do, or it's not damaging in any
it becomes almost a bit like expensive carbohydrate, because your body will use what it needs at a time. So potentially you would need more protein waking up in the morning than you do at the end of the day. Okay. But ultimately it's going to be 3 main meals. So this is what we do automatically. And then depending on how much you're training and how much you need to push that recovery, it could be something like a protein shake or just a protein meal after your training. Okay. And then, for some of the people that I work with who are really pushing it, you put another protein shake in or protein meal in. So it ends up being sort of minimum 3 up to about 5 meals a day. And it'll be difficult to go much more than that. So sort of 5 meals at 25 grams would be the most I would push people. Okay.
And then with the timing of it, you're also saying trying to get a bit of protein right after finishing a training session. Is it as soon as possible? Is there a certain amount of time
so
the day before?
Yeah, so it's not actually needed to be straight after, right? So there was an understanding before that there was this sort of what they called an anabolic window that you had to take advantage of.
Okay, I've definitely heard of this.
Yes, this is not really true. It's actually 24 hours.
Okay.
So it's more
like any of the meals in the next day or so
will be part of it. But what you've got to think about is really the opportune times. So if I'm saying to somebody, try and get sort of 4 meals of 25 grams per day, where would be a best place to put it? So it normally ends up being you have a session in the evening, you finish, you have a protein shake, and then you go home, and probably 2 hours later you have dinner. Yeah. The caveat would be is that if you live nearby the gym, or you're going to have a big meal or go out with friends afterwards, you don't need to put a protein shake in and then have a meal 20 minutes later.
Okay.
Right? It's not wasted, but it would be,
You're getting enough anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I would do then is find another place to put that protein meal, if it is going to be something like a protein shake. But easier way to think about it is really have these sort of protein meals, try and spread them across the day. And like I said, for people who are really pushing their output, we're trying to spread 5 meals across the day, and that really is the sort of most that you're getting it. I mean, that's where you're getting into sort of 150 grams of protein per day, and you really don't need much more than that. And
you mentioned briefly earlier about how maybe we need more protein in the morning. Is there? You've also talked about just a general spread of 25 grams per meal if you're having 5 meals a day. Is there a time when we should have more protein and not so fussed about having protein later in the day, or was that just a generalization?
Not necessarily, but it's a kind of generalization. But probably starting your day with a bigger protein meal, you're probably going to feel better.
Okay.
The interesting thing about protein as well is it's quite satiating. So if you're somebody who sort of struggles to not snack the whole way through the day, normally that's a kind of combination of not eating enough carbs, but also having more protein.
Okay.
So the caveat, obviously, it makes it more difficult for people who are not eating animal products.
I was going to ask that next. Yeah, we said about a palm size of chicken breast, but
sure.
a handful of beans? What would the equivalent be?
It's a little bit more difficult, but you're looking at sort of like, if you were to do it, the very easiest would be like a whole can of beans would be about 25 grams of protein.
Oh, 5 cans of beans a day.
But no, exactly.
That's a lot of beans.
I would not recommend that. But the easiest way to think about it is obviously we're not eating isolate. People don't just eat beans on their own. And so what you're going to understand is that the foods that you're also going to be including are typically going to contain protein as well.
Yeah.
So any wheat-based product is pretty high in protein, actually. If you're not having wheat-based products like bread or pasta, then rice or even potatoes have protein. So some beans, rice, some potatoes, beans, you're going to get there. It's not a difficult thing. And that 25 grams is just a high recommendation.
Okay.
It doesn't have to. You're not going to suddenly waste away if you don't hit 25 grams.
Yeah.
But what I do recommend is really having a think about what am I having for breakfast, for instance, and if you're just having some toast with peanut butter or just some granola with oat milk, that really is not enough protein, I would say, if you're wanting to kick your day off in your strategy. So then it would be to have a look at how could you do that.
What sort of signs might people look out for as evidence that they're not having enough protein? I mean, too much protein is just wasted, so there wouldn't be much to see.
No.
But what sort of things might they look out for if they're worried that they're not getting enough protein?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, and it's not entirely clear, but it would make sense, is that if you find that you are, let's say, more achy more days a week than you would like, you do a hard session and for some reason it just feels like you always have a residual achiness, right? What they call DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, right? That could be just the fact that you're just not getting consistent protein. For instance, what I find with people is that they have this protein shake habit that they have after training, but on the days that they don't train, they're now not having that protein shake. Okay. And so what I always say to people is, why don't you have that as a consistent thing? If you like a protein shake or a small protein meal after training, just plonk that in your day, even if you're not training, so you have that same, because you're going to be recovering during your days off. Really, is important. So that would be the best.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's clever. Okay, great. That's loads of stuff for protein. What about carbohydrates? What sort of things should we pay attention to when considering how we fuel for climbing?
Exactly. So one of the things that people get a little bit confused about is really how much do you need? Because there's a lot of information and there's a lot of things about low carbohydrate and very successful climbers doing that.
Yeah.
And the easiest way I think about it is carbohydrates are really going to be your main energy provider if we're talking about that, unless you are wanting to eat a lot of fat, which most people are not going to be doing. So what you're going to think about is carbohydrates are going to provide two main things, apart from all the vitamins and minerals and different nutrients you find in whole vegetables and fruits and things like that. But outside of that, you're going to be getting fibers, right, which is going to help you with your gut health or your diversity in the gut. But then when we talk about the energy side of things, this is really what I call the rocket fuel. And the easiest way I manage carbohydrates with people is just to understand what is your sort of general baseline amount of carbohydrates that you have per day. And that varies for most people, but in general, it's sort of like 150 grams, maybe 120 grams if you're a smaller
so similar to the amount for protein.
Yeah, pretty much. Like if you're doing a kind of a day where you're not eating, when you're not doing a lot of training or anything, you really don't need that much. It's going to vary. If you're vegan, vegetarian, your carbohydrates are probably going to be almost double that by default, mainly because all of the protein sources you get are going to have carbohydrates. But in general, you're looking at a sort of 150 grams or so. And the easiest way to think about it is sort of like fist-sized portions of rice or pasta. They're probably going to be about 40 to 60 grams. A piece of fruit is
You measure all your food with hand sizes.
Yeah, every day. So what you can think about is to understand that when, on a normal day when you don't need that sort of high octane rocket fuel, right? Your carbohydrates are slightly lower, right? And you'll do this by default anyway. But on the days that you're going to be doing your performance and training, what I do and what is the lever is to put carbohydrates in the session.
Okay. While you're actually training?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically before, during, and after, depending. So that's how it kind of works out, is that you have your normal meals, 3 meals, going to have 3 amounts of carbohydrate in them. And then when you're doing your training, you have basically sort of 30 to 60 grams before. Maybe depending on how long the session is, you might have another 30 to 60 or more during that session.
What are your go-to carbohydrates?
So
banana, trail mix?
So basically I would say things, and one of the things you've got to think about is really how fast it digests, right? No one really wants to climb after eating a massive bowl of oats, right? So the sort of carbohydrates we use during training or just before are things going to be like fruit, a muesli bar, sort of a healthy snack bar. I'm a big fan of pita breads. I carry pita breads in my thing, and they're pretty easy to chomp on. But those sort of things are going to work. You can do liquid carbs as well, like fruit juice or a sports drink. But the reason that they are sort of easier digesting and, let's say, more refined is because, within sort of 10, 15 minutes, that glucose is in circulation and you're going to have a much, more power. And the reason that I talk about putting carbs into the session goes back to the first point we've made, which is if you can consistently do a high rate of good work, then you're going to become a better climber. So a lot of my clients I see when they first come to me, they don't tend to eat during climbing. And that's always the first intervention. Why don't you just try putting in a banana or a muesli bar or something in to your session and see if that actually helps you maintain a much higher quality workload. So what I see with a lot of my clients, or when they first come in, is that's really the key thing to change first is, are they eating anything before their session or during their session? And it goes to that point that we made right at the beginning, which is I really feel that the person who does the most consistent quality training and practice, who has the focus and has the energy to pay attention, that you're going to get the most out of your climbing. You're going to enjoy it more and you're going to develop. And that's really what nutrition is, and that's this concept of rocket fuel is basically if you can put carbs in during your session, you're going to just get a better quality session. And the interesting thing is, and a lot of people worry about weight and all this sort of stuff, is that your body sort of adapts and upregulates what you give it. If you're sending strong signals to your body that you're trying hard and you're pushing and you're using your muscles and you're putting the carbohydrates in, your body just uses it all up in that session because it has the fuel available and it can just push. So I just really encourage you to experiment. Choose different foods, see which ones work better. Some people prefer fruit, some people prefer muesli bars, but give it a good go.
And we talked a few minutes ago about what sort of things we might look out for if we might be underfueling with protein. What about with carbohydrates? What sort of things could we look out for there?
Yeah, so I think fatigue is really the main thing. And I think what can happen is that it doesn't show up so soon. It might be sort of tapering towards the end of the week or after 2 weeks. And certainly if you're kind of a new climber or someone who's come in and they've been sort of climbing around and having fun, but now want more sort of structured training, and now you're choosing days a week to train and you're pushing yourself a little more and have structure. What I see is that if you don't get that energy right, if you're slightly under energy or you're not fueling your session, and I call it kind of micro under recovery, it just starts to add up over time. And then within maybe 2 weeks, you're just feeling like you're missing a bit of pep or you're a little bit of like, you're just a little bit too sore. But what is interesting is that I see that even with climbers who come in from a high protein diet already, that it doesn't matter how much protein you put in, you can still feel under recovered because of the energy.
Okay.
And so I've had people who say, I'm eating 160 grams of protein, but I still have muscle soreness. When they put carbohydrates in, or just more energy consistently through the week, that actually goes. So don't think that muscle soreness is a product of low protein.
Okay.
It can be a product of just low energy.
Okay, so that does ruin the thing I was going to say next then, because we can cut this out of the video if it's not true, but would it be an oversimplification if I tried to view it as proteins are good for recovery, carbohydrates are good for energy to do the work?
No. So that's
good.
So that's what I've noticed.
Keep it in the video.
Yeah. So that is. So this is the interesting thing, and I think this is what I've got from working with people, is that I have people coming in and they have really good protein intake, and they feel like they're under recovering, and so by putting in more carbohydrates and putting carbohydrates in the session itself and after the session, is almost like you're kicking off that recovery. And so one of the things I think the easiest way to think about is during your training, you're trying to build yourself up, right? You're trying to build up your skill, you're trying to build up your body, send strong growth signals, development signals. So if you have this mindset of building, or what we call like anabolic signaling, then you pair that with your nutrition. You want food to come in and energy to come in to provide an anabolic signal to support your body's output. So a lot of times people think about food as fuel, and I even mentioned rocket fuel. However, I want you to also think about it that energy is there to not provide you energy just to do the work, but provide you energy to support all the underlying chemistry of your body to allow you to build and recover and become a bigger person in that sense, right?
Well put. Well, we were talking about energy and having more pep.
Yes.
And I thought, good one to talk about next would be coffee. I think coffee is great. Obviously, I drink coffee all the time. I'm drinking coffee right now. But then I also I see an Instagram post from a climber or something saying, it's my rest day, so today I'm going to have some coffee.
Right.
And I'm looking at it going, seems like a pointless day to drink coffie. You have coffee before you do hard climbs.
Right.
What do you reckon to all of this, though?
Okay, so coffee is an amazing thing, or rather caffeine is the major thing here. Caffeine does what everybody knows it does.
Go fast juice.
Which is, right, which helps with focus, it helps with power output, it lowers our perceived exertion or pain threshold, it keeps us awake, keeps us alert. The problem with caffeine is it covers, let's say, a multitude of sins.
Okay.
And I think this is where it can become a problem. So two key things, and this is almost the first intervention I do with people, is where is your last cup of coffee? And many people will do an evening climbing session. They arrive at the gym at 7 o'clock, they have a coffee, they don't eat anything, and they go and do their session. Yeah. And the session is going to be good.
Because they're full of coffee.
Exactly. But the problem is that you're running off a stimulant, right? And if we're thinking about an anabolic signal, and we're thinking about supportive food to help muscles recover and your body recover, you're basically doing a session fasted with a stimulant.
Yeah.
Plus, the half-life of coffee or caffeine is about 8 hours. So
it might be good. So that session you just described for the people who are having coffee, not eating, and basically just doing it based off a stimulant, that sounds good for performance, but not good long-term for actually building and growing as a climber.
It's good for performance acutely.
Yeah.
It's going to mess up your sleep, and so your sleep being messed up is going to hamper your recovery. So I'm not saying caffeine isn't good. What I'm saying is, one, I believe if you can, the last coffee you should have of the day is about 3 o'clock.
It's 3:15 right now.
Right. So, because that gives it enough time to basically clear your system so that when you go to sleep, you're not trying to sleep under a stimulant, even a very slight one.
Yeah.
And then what you can do to replace the coffee in the evening, if you need that pep after work, is to have some sugary carbohydrates.
Okay.
Right? Because you're going to get that same flux of energy, right?
Yeah.
And
you actually get energy from it.
Yeah, and one of the great things about understanding carbohydrates or using carbohydrates as quote-unquote rocket fuel is it also gives you the opportunity to eat all the things that you don't, or you get told not to eat. So if you want to have cookies and brownies and chocolates, it's actually not a bad place to put them, right? Having a chocolate brownie just before you do a training session, you'll be surprised at how like just full of fuel and energy you have, having a chocolate brownie sitting at your desk is not such a great thing. You're going to get that slump, right? So there is a way that you can use those. So I'd really encourage you, if it's a Saturday or weekend or you're climbing in the morning, by all means, do the nice combo of carbs and caffeine.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely, you'll have a fantastic session. And also putting caffeine at a midway point. You know, if you are doing a longer session or out climbing.
But no after dinner coffees.
No, I really don't think so.
I've never understood that.
Yeah,
I'm going to get rid of my coffee. I'm convinced. Another thing that I was wanting to ask was about how much we can trust cravings or our body's sense of things. Like, I'm sure everyone else has this, but occasionally I can tell my body's going, give me protein now, or give me carbohydrates, whatever it is. And very often I'm like, yeah, okay, body knows what it wants. I'll ask for carbohydrates now, and I feel loads better. But is that the sort of thing we should trust, or is that me being bossed around by cravings, which is not actually helping me fuel properly?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I don't know the research on it specifically, whether there is something. But I think the things that you tend to see the most are if you are craving, let's say, sort of carby, rich, sugary foods, normally I think that's maybe a kind of residual fatigue that's happened. Or two things. One is there's a kind of residual fatigue. Okay. So an easy example of that is if we don't get a good night's sleep, most of the time we want something sugary and high energy, right? That's where we tend to do that. So that's an easy understanding of where that is, right? Carbohydrates typically are the foods that we eat if we're in a kind of emotional situation, or quote unquote comfort foods, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, to use them like that, and to enjoy foods like that. So I think from that point of view is that, if you're craving that sort of energy dense foods, or you're finding that you'll keep leaning towards sugary things, then one of the things you can actually have a look at is really the quality of your carbohydrates throughout the week. You know, or rather not just the quality, but the consistency of carbohydrates. And I find this with people is that when they eat more carbs consistently, you have less cravings for sugary foods. And I think it's just because you're topping the body off with that. And then the caffeine sleep cycle. And I think everyone's had this where you get very busy and you have caffeine and sugar and poor sleep and more caffeine and more sugar, and you get in this massive spiral. And that's really what's going on. It's an energy point there. Protein cravings, I don't know. It's an interesting one. And I think, people who have done things like a plant-based diet, they sometimes have that, whether it is a taste thing or is our body asking for more iron, for instance, or things. I don't know the research on that. But I think what we do know is there is an understanding that potentially our body will seek out to eat more food until we hit a level of protein.
Okay.
And this is an interesting one, is if you're finding that you are very hungry during the day and you're snacking on a lot of things and you keep buying more and more snacks, and if you have a look at your whole day, you probably had quite a low protein day. And it's almost like the body is asking you to keep eating foods because it's trying to find that protein, but you're not giving it in, Pringles and Kit Kats. Yeah. So I'm
not just having Pringles and Kit Kats, by the way, folks. It looks like it's all directed at me. It's partly directed at me.
Caffeine, Pringles and Kit Kats.
I've understood. I should eat my donuts regularly across the week, not all in one burst. I've learned loads. I've got it.
But yes, so that's where I think you'll find is if you do put in consistency of some sort of strategy of eating. Yeah. And I always think a really good place to start is breakfast, right? It's one of those meals that maybe we have two options, right? And we're quite happy having the same sort of thing back and forth. Yeah. So if you build your breakfast being a very protein-rich breakfast, put in some carbs, some sort of slower digesting carbs, you'll probably find that you won't have that craving for a Kit Kat or something at 11 o'clock, and your caffeine intake might be lower. So again, it's that sort of base. Yeah. If you think about putting a base of consistency with nutrition, it tends to sort things out. Whether there are cravings for certain foods because of vitamins that you're not getting, possibly. But the big thing I would say with using your, let's say, intuition with food is that it can be a tricky one because I've worked with people who feel like they eat enough, but from a good practice and recommendations, they are consistently under-eating, right? Not necessarily enough to create a deficit and lose weight, but they're in this very weird gray area of like they're not eating enough to push themselves further.
I remember this is exactly what you and I worked on a few years ago, that I was coming to you saying, okay, this is what I'm eating now, this is the training that I want to be doing, and you were saying quite clearly, well, these don't add up. I know it feels like you're eating lots, but you need to be eating like this much to sustain what you're planning on doing. Segueing nicely onto my next question, everyone obviously has a slightly different balance, everyone's got different bodies. I know you've given very good recommendations of general guidelines of this is how much protein, this is how much carbohydrate, this is how we should time our meals and things, but surely it's slightly different for everybody. How can people experiment to find the right sort of balance, or what sort of things should they pay attention to?
Yeah, so what is interesting is that the protein thing probably doesn't really need to be that different for most people.
Okay.
And I think it's really like, it would be the easiest way to say, if there is a small person next to a very large person, right, of either sex, then yes, there's going to be a disparity between amount of energy and things like that. But in terms of protein, there wouldn't be that much of a difference, because the person's lean body mass is not going to be tens of kilograms different between the two. So you don't have to worry too much about that. That's why I would say, let's say to a small female athlete, it would be 4 to 5 meals of protein of sort of 20 to 25 grams. For a bigger guy, similar thing, because you're still providing those building blocks and the signaling for growth. It's going to be the energy that is going to be the separation. How much more energy do you need? What was your specific question again?
It wasn't very specific at all.
I can't remember what you said.
It was how people can tell for themselves whether or not the balance of their nutrition is correct.
That's right. So I think the easiest way to do it, and this is what I do with clients, is to just explore. So you sort of take my recommendations and just try it. Right? See how you feel putting in more carbs during your training session. And if you wanted to, you could use something like getting on a scale in the morning and just seeing whether or not your weight is trending up or down. It's a very blunt tool, but it's a very cheap tool, and is a way to actually help you. And with all of my clients, I start them on something called a discovery phase, which is really me giving them high targets for everything, like trying to find what is their maximum. And we do that for 2 weeks, because within 2 weeks, their weight goes up a little bit, maybe half a kilo to a kilo, and then just hovers there. And what they find is that they're just feeling like they can do a lot more, and they're recovering better. And yes, the cost is a little bit more weight, but
it's worth it because they can do so much more work.
Sure, but the interesting thing is that weight is not fat gain. That weight is actually the weight of the food that they're eating, right? If you're eating more food, you're eating more weight of food. And if you're eating consistently, then there's this food that is passing through your gut consistently. So, that's one of the things. And also there is a hydration change if you're eating more carbohydrates and things like that. But what I would really encourage you is to keep a loose journal. I'm eating this today, and I had these, and I had a banana, and and some foods don't work so well with people. For one person eating, let's say, a cookie or a brownie before climbing, they might get a slump of energy, and they'll feel a little bit spacey. And that's because their digestion or their sort of gut is slightly different. For some people, they could have a banana and they'll feel very sort of an upset stomach because of maybe the fiber. So this is not a difficult thing to do, is just keep some notes. You keep your training journal, put in, had a banana before, had a muesli bar halfway through, had something afterwards, and this is how I felt, and things like that. But really, that's the main thing. And I think it also goes to dietary preferences. You know quite easily whether or not something like dairy agrees with you. Some people do better on a sort of more dairy-based diet and more fish and things like that. Other people handle red meats and things like that well. The big thing is that we know from research that there is not one perfect diet or one healthiest diet that just goes across the whole world. It really doesn't work like that. There appears to be a sort of ancestry point from where your whole lineage is. You're going to handle different foods better or worse, which is great, right? But and so it really is a case of the easiest thing is just a diet that is replete with whole, fresh foods as best as you can, and then whether or not you find animal products of different sorts better or worse for you, that could be a sort of thing of intuition.
That's really good to know. And you were saying, of course, you work with loads and loads of different climbers. Climbers are mostly who you
Yes,
work with.
100%, yeah.
What are the most common errors that you see people making before you start working with them? I'm assuming underfueling is a common one.
Yeah, so I think that normally people come in, it depends on where they are in their sort of climbing careers. But normally the two things I see are, one is the consistency of the protein, which we covered, and then just not having a consistent amount of energy across the week. And what it is that on the days that people mostly train, they might have massive meals. Normally, like dinner ends up being very big. Yeah. But then it's sort of scattered across the week. So they have like a really big weekend of eating, and then they don't eat very much on Tuesdays or something. So those are the sort of things. And then, funny enough, depending on where you come from in the world, your diet looks better or worse. Most Europeans have a lot more fresh vegetables and foods. Unfortunately, if you come from the US, it tends to be a lot of things that come in packets. Yeah. So that's just a caveat. Is obviously,
depends where you are.
Yeah, and what you have access to, and your budget and things like that. But the big thing I see with people is really just general energy intake across the day, and then just leveraging that carbohydrates depending on what you're doing. And yes, a lot of people try to find the minimum they can get away with, rather than trying to find the maximum they can get away with. And that's the big thing I would encourage is give yourself 2 weeks, like you're trying a new training plan. Give yourself 2 weeks and say, you know what, I'm just going to eat a load over these 2 weeks, and let's see what happens. Yeah. Let's see how I feel. The worst thing is that, basically your budget for food during the week might be a little higher, basically. But at least you'll know, and also your body weight, you'll know what happens when you eat this. Yeah. So I encourage you to do that.
There we go. And last question, but possibly quite a tricky one, because we've talked about loads of stuff. For anyone who's just skipping to the end of the video, how would you summarize the stuff we've talked about today? What would be the main action points that you want people to go away with having learned from this video?
Sure. So the key thing is, I would say, try and get a minimum of sort of 4 meals of protein per day, 25 grams. So that's 3 main meals, and then something like a protein meal after your training or your session, which for most people, that's going to be something like a protein supplement, right? Okay. And then you're going to leverage carbohydrate depending on what you're doing. So on the days that you're not doing training and a lot of sport or whatever, you don't have to eat so much carbohydrates. Maybe that could be a sort of lower carbohydrate, and then you can include more things like nuts and avocados and maybe foods that you don't normally have, like a nice stew or something, right? And then on the days that you're training or you're trying to push your body, then use that sort of concept of rocket fuel, rocket fuel I talk about. Think about, how do I create an anabolic signal, a growth signal, a development signal to the body, and a way to support it. And that is going to be just turning that dial up for carbohydrates. And for most people, it's almost double what they had on their normal day, which is actually not a lot. It could be 150 grams on a normal day, 300 grams of carbs on a training day. And to be honest, it's not difficult, because if a banana is 25 grams, a muesli bar is 30 grams, it's just dialing that up and then having a little bit more. Yeah. But those are the key things, I think, is the main thing, is that. And then hydration, which we actually haven't talked about. Yeah. But hydration is a very easy thing. I think putting in strategies like, for instance, I wake up in the morning, I have a pint glass in my bathroom. So the first thing I do is drink a pint of water first thing in the morning. I have exactly the same habit. Yeah. No coffee till I've had 2 pints of water. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a very good way of starting. And I know from personal experience that when I've looked at my training logs, the days that I have more water before training, not right before, but the hours leading into it, the onset of pump is much less. That's a really good one. Yeah, so I find that is a very good thing. So nutrition doesn't have to be complicated. There's a lot of information out there that is grams per kilogram of body mass and all of that. But from somebody who's working with people, real people in real lives, it doesn't have to be that. It's really about understanding, what is the things that you can repeatedly do. Come up with a breakfast that you enjoy. Keep doing that. Yeah. Have a strategy that you take with you on your training or your sessions. I always have, let's say, a banana and 2 pita breads and a box of muesli bars in my sports bag. And that's just what I do. I take my shoes, my chalk, and my climbing nutrition. And then you'll make your lives much easier. And having that consistency, and I think this is really the main takeaway, is have consistency of nutrition throughout the week, and you just find that no longer do you have to take so many rest days or having to have a complete week off because you just burnt out.
Yeah.
You just find that you can actually, our bodies are incredible, and if we provide the nutrition for it, we can just keep going.
Perfect. Well, there we go, folks. So concludes our lovely Q&A about basics of nutrition for climbers. If you have more questions, put them in the comment section below. Tom and I will meet up again and do another nutrition discussion.
Sure.
But get all your questions in there now. And in the meantime, like, subscribe, follow, all the YouTube things. And we'll see you next time. Bye, folks.
Ciao.